Right. And so, as I was saying, we're going to skip around a lot today. Finally coming, I hope to come to the end. If we don't, and we may not, especially since we just talked about the eclipse for 15 minutes, but that's fine. Actually, I thought it was worthwhile. So if we don't, we are going to next week not talk about Joshua. I mentioned I want to talk about the Song of Songs, which is read on, and if there's also time, on the seventh day of Passover, we read a different poem, which is the Song at the Sea, the song that the Israelites sing together once they pass through the sea. So the Song of Songs, and maybe that the next time, and then we'll be skipping. We'll not have class for 2 weeks because it'll actually be Yontif on those Tuesdays. And then we will return again the week after Passover. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen as we start looking at Joshua. Okay, and let me make this smaller. Okay, so I moved ahead to chapter 12. And the following are the local kings. They're called Melech, king, but they seem to be much more tribal leaders in each place. The Israelites defeated on the west side of the Jordan, from Gaal Gad in the valley of the Lebanon to Mount Halak, which ascends Seir, which Joshua assigned as a possession to the tribal divisions of Israel. And then you'll see sort of interesting list. We're not going to read it all. These are the kings. These are these tribal leaders that were defeated. And we see the king of Jericho, and it's in order. The king of Jericho, the king of Ai near Beit El, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Yarmith, the king of Lachish. And you can see it goes on and on with that. And then Joshua is old, advanced in years. God says to him, "You have grown old, you are advanced in years, and very much of the land still remains to take possession of it. This is the territory that remains," and we get all the districts of the Philistines and so on. And I'll just skip through. And then it says, divide this territory into hereditary portions for the 9 tribes and half of the tribe of Manasseh. Now, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the other half have already received shares that Moses assigned them on the east side of the Jordan, as assigned to them by Moses. You remember that this had to do with the fact that they wanted to stay after the battles had taken place there, and the Israelites had conquered that land, and they say, well, this is great land, let us stay. And the agreement that was made, I hope if you're not muted, please mute, because I'm hearing something. At any rate, the agreement that was made was that these 2.5 tribes would go and fight, and then they could go home, and where they had already left their families and their possessions. So they get left out, and then we get this list. That was the town. What they got was the towns of Sihon, of the Amorites, and the entire kingdom of Og, who had reigned at Bashar. But they failed to dispossess several other tribes, which remain among Israel to this day. Now, so Joshua is going to divide things up. No hereditary portion was ascribed to the tribe of Levi, because their portion was from the sacrifices of the Eternal, the God of Israel, as God had spoken. So they become the priests, and it seems that the Levites at this early period also have some priestly prerogatives. They're not just assisting the Kohanim, and they don't get a portion of the land, though, as we will see shortly, they do get some cities. We'll come to that. Okay, so I think at this point, as you'll see, it just goes on and on and on, who gets what, the various clans, and so on. So we are actually going to jump to chapter 19, because all of this is just lists and lists of places and who got what. It's 40. Okay, and this is just to show you, this is the last tribe that gets its land by lottery. As you know, and here is there, that's the tribe of Dan, who is in the very north of the land, and this is what they get. But they lost that territory, and they had to go and fight for it, and they captured it.
Hi, any idea when you might be able to start doing this stuff for our trees?
Excuse me?
Sorry, I thought I was muted.
Yeah, so please mute now. Okay, they finished allotting the land by its boundaries. And then the Israelites give a portion to Joshua. And I think this is striking because Joshua has not given himself a portion. And in a sense, you might say that, he doesn't want there to be a sense that, well, he chose for himself and everybody else got assigned. So the people of Israel as a whole give him this town, which he wanted. These are the portions assigned by lot to the tribes of Israel by Eleazar, Joshua, the son of Nun, the family heads, before God at Shiloh, at the entrance of the tent of meeting, when they had finished dividing the land. So note that Shiloh is where all of this takes place, and Shiloh is where the ark has come to rest. So everything is taking place there, and they have divided the land. And now God says to Joshua, now that the land has been divided, speak to the Israelites, designate the cities of refuge about which I commanded you through Moses, to which a manslayer who kills a person by mistake unintentionally may flee. So you probably recall this. There are cities that are designated if a person accidentally kills someone. And if you go back to the source of this, it's, one of the signs is they weren't lying in wait. We even got examples when you get back to the Torah, someone, for example, who's using an axe and the axe handle flies off and hits someone. They can go to these cities of refuge. And now God is telling the Israelites within their designated land to designate cities of refuge. And they shall serve you as a refuge from the blood avenger. And as you might remember, the idea here was, and this was a more primitive time, and I think this is one of the great innovations of the Torah, that originally, somebody killed a member of your family, you were the one. You went, you found them, and you killed them. And you could imagine, the Hatfields and the McCoys, right? That these blood feuds would go on. So the manslayer, the blood avenger, Goel HaAdam, is going to pursue this person who accidentally killed someone, and they can go to one of these designated cities, and they are designated through the land of Israel in such a way that there's one at the top, there's one at the middle, there's one at the bottom, your area has one of these cities, because you need to be able to get there pretty quickly. The slayer should flee to one of these cities, stand at the entrance to the city gate, and plead the case before the elders of that city. Right? So now we're getting something that we had not seen actually before. And that is the mechanics of how this actually worked. So the manslayer goes to the city of refuge. They are standing at the gates to the city, and they have to plead the case that they are entitled to enter. And the gates of cities in ancient times were where courts were placed. And this is a kind of initial hearing that takes place here. And once they've done that, they shall offer admission to the city and provide a place in which to live among them. Now, this is a rather cursory kind of examination, as we'll see. But they need to meet, you know, this reminds me of someone who might come, and of course we have huge problems at the border now, but someone who would come and plead that they needed asylum, and they're allowed to come in. And then after they're in, then the merits of their claims are going to be adjudicated. Should the blood avenger come in pursuit, they shall not give up the manslayer, since the other person was killed without intent and had not been an enemy in the past. There was no evidence that this was, you know, a kind of cover-up for a planned murder. And the slayer shall live in the city until there is a trial before the assembly. Okay, so now we get a second phase, right? And it's not clear who the assembly is. It's some kind of larger judicial body, but it's not the whole people. It's not like a public assembly. And they remain there until the death of the high priest who is in office at that time. Thereafter, the manslayer may return home. So the idea here is that once the high priest dies, everybody knows that the no blood avenger can pursue a person who's been in this city, and they no longer need protection. And a couple of things are striking about this, one of which is that the death of the high priest could be the next year, or it could be 40 years later, right? It's not like they are kept in this place for a certain length of time. It's not determined in that way. And I think that there is a suggestion here, though it's not at all explicit, that the death of the high priest somehow atones for what happened to them, what happened to the deceased, that the debt somehow has been paid off. And it's a striking notion. The Talmud, actually, the Talmud has a lot to say about the manslayer and this whole process of going to these cities of refuge. Talmud says, for example, that there were on every major road intersection throughout the land, there would be a sign pointing to the Lamiklat, to this city where they would be protected, so that if you were running away, you didn't have to know the way. This reminds me of, like signs to get to the parkway. It could be some distance away, but you start seeing signs and then you follow them and you go here and you go there until you finally come to the parkway entrance. And from the rabbinic point of view, as they try to envision what this was like, and the whole institution is gone, they have a whole different way of dealing with this. And we don't have in the rabbinic period, blood avengers at all anywhere, but they think back to what this might be like. They also are not quite happy with this idea that there's this local assembly that is going to make this decision. And so they actually have the manslayer brought out of the city temporarily and taken to a rabbinic court. And again, this didn't happen. And he is adjudicated there. And if he is found innocent, then he's brought back to the city. And then one final thing about this, and that is the rabbi, and I think this is such a nice touch. The rabbis say that the wives of the priests would weave garments and send them to the people living in these refuge cities so that they would be positively disposed to the high priest and not pray that he die so that they could be released. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Any questions or comments about division of the land, or in particular, the laws of the city of refuge, how they're located, how the Talmud looks at it, anything at all? Yeah, Sandy, and then Saul.
So it said the slayer shall live in that city until there's a trial. What is the trial all about? Well,
so the idea here is this. The amount of proof to get into the city is minimal, if not non-existent, right? You can't keep somebody waiting when somebody is pursuing them. But once they're in, now we have to find out if they really deserve to be there, right? So you're going to bring in witnesses. You're going to, at least that there was no enmity between the two. Oh, yes, I know these people. They lived in peace and harmony. There was no, right? In other words, there needs to be some kind of adjudication, serious adjudication within the city for someone to be able to stay there. And that's really what that's about.
But if they're found innocent, they still have to stay?
No, yes, because they're being protected. The whole point, so there are two things going on. One thing is that if they leave, that this relative of the deceased is going to find them and kill them. So this is for their protection. But I think there is also a slightly punitive quality to it, because they are confined. It's not like jail exactly. It's a whole city. They have the run of the city. On the other hand, they have been responsible for the loss of a life. And given that, even though it's accidental, I think it's got slightly more to do, more than simply protection. Although that's not the way the Torah describes it. I'm reading a bit into it. Saul.
Any comments about the families of the person who committed manslaughter, if the Kohen Gadol dies in a short period of time? Any comments about?
So yes, at least the rabbinic period. So the family moves with them, right? So that they should be separated from their family. But of course, then the family is effectively, as it were, imprisoned there. And if a rabbi goes in, their students follow. Of course, there are no rabbis in the biblical period, right? I mean, this is all, but this sense that the students are like the family and they too go in, right? So thanks for mentioning that. There is certainly concern about that within rabbinic literature. Barry, you're muted.
So if the person who is fleeing is found basically guilty, that it was not accidental, is it was presumably that is punished, the person is punished, put to death?
No. I don't think so. In rabbinic times, that would certainly be the case. And of course, it's silent on this subject. So
Yeah, well,
we're simply
that's-
reading, I'm simply reading in, but my assumption is they get kicked out. Right? And then, the manslayer, it literally in Hebrew, it's Goel Hadam, somehow the redeemer of the blood, right? Who is pursuing the blood avenger will find them and take their revenge. We don't seem to have, I'm not clear of any kind of murder trials as such. I mean, the Torah does say someone should be executed. Someone who does this should be executed. They get stoned, probably killed in a more humane way first, and then stoned as a way of humiliating them. But how that happens, what kind of a procedure, we don't really know. By the time you get to the rabbinic period, there are all kinds of, there's huge amount of rabbinic literature about how this would take place. Exactly. And there are 4 different kinds of death penalties, and what kind of, do they get stoned, or do they get burned, which the rabbis say, by the way, is it not being thrown into a fire, but swallowing something that will create a burning sensation. So, but there are 4 kinds of punishment, and the rabbis talk about which punishment is appropriate for what, and how the evidence is reviewed, and and how far it seems that a person can be brought back even as they're about to be executed and retried if there's any kind of evidence, and what about false witnesses, and on and on and on. Right? We don't see any of that in the Bible. Does that mean there wasn't any of it? Does it mean, it's certainly possible that they could execute the person. It's interesting, when you ask that, it strikes me, I hadn't thought about this before, but maybe this is the reason why in the rabbinic period, the trial does not take place inside the city. The idea would be that they would be taken to a rabbinic court, and if they were found guilty, then that court would pass sentence and they would be executed, right? But you don't have rabbinic courts in the biblical period. You don't have any of that. And so my assumption from the point of view of the rabbis, you can't just let them go out of the city because there's no blood avenger, right? But I think it's likely that the idea is expelled from the city, left to be executed in the very traditional way that it was done.
Yes, and then it's just, going back to the division of the land, what is important consideration is what is considered to be the boundaries of the land to which are allotted.
Yeah.
So, that has relevance today.
Well, so yes, right. So the boundaries of the land that's allotted to an individual tribe are specified fairly completely, and in terms of which towns are within it, in terms of some natural boundaries around it. That's one of the reasons that it takes so many chapters. There's a lot of detail specifying, which tribe is where. There also is a sense of what is the extent of the land of Israel. Does it extend over to the other side of the Jordan? Well, that's not the land of Israel, but the tribes are given the right to live there. So what does that mean, right? Can we say that's within the bounds of the land, the Holy Land? No, we can't say that. On the other hand, they have permission to live there because they conquered it. So, and then you get throughout the Torah different statements about the extent of the land, and they are not consistent. And I mean, the biggest one is, from the Euphrates. It's enormous, right? Which was never the case, right? In the time, even in the time of Solomon, when the land, the Israelite land was at its maximum extent, there's no sense of that. So I don't think that this actually becomes part of modern political debate, even among those who say, this is our land, right? Because God gave it to us. Exactly where is that when it comes to sort of no one is pointing to the area around the Euphrates, even though it's in the Torah, and saying that's the land, right? There is some dispute, certainly on the other side of the Jordan, there's some dispute, but not more than that. Okay, any other questions about anything we've looked at? If not, we're gonna move on. I want to look, let me share my screen again. And we're gonna move just to 21 very briefly. And here we get the Levites. You remember, and we just read, that they did not get, the tribe of Levi does not get a portion of the land. And now they come to Eleazar the priest and to Joshua and the family heads of the Israelite tribes. And they speak to them at Shiloh, and they say, God commanded through Moses that we be given counts to live in, along with pastures for their livestock, right? And so the Israelites, in accordance with God's command, assign the Levites out of their own portions the following towns with their pastures. And the first lot among them fell to the Kohathites, the descendants of the priest of Aaron. There fell by lot 13 towns from the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Shimon, and the tribe of Benjamin. And to the remaining Kohathites, 10 more towns in the tribe of Ephraim and Dan and the half tribe of Manasseh. And then we get the Gershonites and so on, and they are getting their towns. And the idea is that they are scattered through the land because they will have some kind of priestly function. And part of it is that they need to be among the tribes so that they are accessible to them. Okay, we are going to jump now to chapter 22. You can see I'm just passing over which one got which cities. Okay, now we get to those 2.5 tribes. Joshua summons the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half tribe of Manasseh and said, you have observed all that Moses commanded you, have obeyed me in everything that I commanded you. You have not forsaken your kindred through the long years down to this day. And this gives us a sense that these battles went on for a long time. You have faithfully observed the instruction of the Eternal your God, and now the Eternal has given your kindred rest. In other words, the battles are over for now. Therefore, turn and go back to your homes in the land of your holdings beyond the Jordan that Moses, the servant of God, assigned to you. But be very careful to fulfill the instruction and teaching that Moses, the servant of God, enjoined upon you. Right? So you're going back. You're not going to be in the land of Israel. And in fact, you're going to be among pagans, right? Because there they had not been dispossessed. As I've mentioned before, they haven't really been dispossessed in the land of Israel either. And actually, when we get to the book of Judges, the very beginning of the book, you'll see that there are lots and lots of Canaanites still in the land. But here, the idea is you're going to go back, and therefore, God enjoins you to love the eternal your God, to walk in God's ways, to keep God's commandments, and to hold fast to God and render all service with your heart and soul. This language sounds a lot like Deuteronomy, but it's right. It starts with love, right? This enjoyment. As we saw in the Shema, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might, right? And this is the assumption here is that you are going to have, you're not just going to obey out of fear that God will, if you don't do the right thing, God will punish you, but you will appreciate all that God has done for you, and you will have an emotional connection to God. You'll want to obey, right? Walking in God's ways, right, is interesting because it's in addition to keeping the commandments. So it seems to be more than that. It seems, and here it's walking in godly ways, right? There is a sense of living a certain kind of life, in addition to following the specifics of the commandments, which are really, the treaty, the covenant that has been made. And here is perhaps the most striking. Hold fast, davek, to cling to, right? That you really will, somehow feel a deep connection to God and render service with all your heart and your soul, all of you. So they're being warned that they need to do this because they're going back, and Joshua blesses them and dismisses them and went to their homes. To the one half of Manasseh, Moses had assigned a territory in Bashan, and to the other, the territory on the west side of the Jordan with their kinship. And now Joshua says to the 2.5 tribes as he sends them off and blesses them, he said to them, return to your homes with great wealth, with very much livestock, with silk, gold, copper, and iron, much clothing, and share the spoil of your enemies with your kin. So they have fought, they are entitled to take the booty and go home with it. Now, this is a little bit difficult, because remember that they were supposed to destroy everything, right? That was the cherem, all of their enemies. Not only are they executed, but their stuff is supposed to be banned, devoted to God. So we see here a very mixed picture. That we have a kind of idealized vision, and from our perspective, of course, nothing ideal about genocide. What we have is rather very different. Lots of Canaanites are going to be left in the land. The battles have been fought, they have been plundered, and we already had with Achan, who violated the ban, right, and actually took some stuff, that later on the people are allowed to keep spoil, a modification. And therefore they go and they make their way back, and that they had acquired. And so, but when they get there, when they came to the region of the Jordan in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites and Gadites, half the tribe of Manasseh, built an altar there by the Jordan, a great conspicuous altar, huge. And archaeologists have actually found something they think may be this massive kind of altar. All right. So word gets back to the Israelites. The Reubenites and the Gadites, the half tribe of Manasseh, have built an altar opposite the land of Canaan in the region of the Jordan. And when they heard this, the whole community of Israelites assembled at Shiloh to make war on them. right? So this altar seems to be an enormous provocation, right? Not entirely clear, though we'll see some explanation, not entirely clear why they would be so incensed by this. Remember that Shiloh is, at that time, seems to be the important cultic site. They are establishing something independent. Are they breaking away? Will their worship be different? Are the people worried about divine punishment? We're not told, although we'll see some of it. By the way, at the end, so this book, this war is not going to happen. But at the end of the book of Judges, actually, you'll see a war between the tribes. And later on, during the period of Kings, the land after Solomon will be divided into two kingdoms, and they will fight each other. So this idea of tribal unity, which we'll see here, we're not going to see later on. Okay, so first the Israelites sent Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, there, accompanied by 10 chieftains, one chieftain from each tribal families, each one of them a family head, and they came and they spoke. They said, all of God's community, what is this treachery that you have committed this day against the God of Israel, turning away from God, building yourselves an altar and rebelling against God? So this is how they understand it. As a kind of rebellion. They are not thinking that they will be worshiping the God of Israel there, right? They are thinking, right, that this will become idolatry. Of course, it could be that the 2.5 tribes intend to worship the God of Israel there, though they will deny that eventually. Is the sin of Peor, which brought a plague upon God's community, such a small thing to us? We have not purified ourselves from this to this day. That was the sin of Baal Peor, as the people really turned in an orgiastic way away from serving God. And now you would turn away from God. If you rebel against God today, the divine wrath will be directed at the whole community. Is it because the land of your holding is impure? Then cross over to God's holding, where the tabernacle abides, acquire holdings among us, right? You can come back. Don't rebel against God. Don't rebel against us by building for yourselves an altar. And Achan, the son of Zerach, had violated the prescription. Remember, and when he did that, anger struck the whole community of Israel. That was the violation of the Cherem that we read about. And now they reply. The Reubenites, the Gadites, and half tribe of Manasseh said, Adonai hu Elohim, right? God, the eternal God. God, the eternal God, right? It's an oath being spoken here. God knows, and Israel should know, if we acted in rebellion or treachery against God, don't vindicate us. If we built an altar to turn away from God, if it was to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or to prevent sacrifices of well-being on it, may God be the one to demand a reckoning. We did this thing only out of our concern that in time to come, your children may say to our children, what have you to do with the God of Israel? In other words, they could say, God has made the Jordan a boundary between us. Reubenites and Gadites, you have no share in God. Thus, your children may prevent our children from worshiping God. In other words, we built this not because we want to worship another God. We wanted to build an altar as a witness that this altar is a sign for all times, that it's a kind of copy of the altar in Shiloh, to show here too are where the Israelites are. Not for burnt offerings or other sacrifice, but as a witness between us, between the generations to come. that we will be allowed to go to Shiloh with our burnt offerings, our sacrifices, our offerings of well-being. And your children should not say to our children, you have no share in God. We reason, should they speak to us and our children in time to come, we would say, see the replica of God's altar, which our father made, not for burnt offerings or sacrifices, but as a witness between it. Far be it from us to rebel against God or to turn this day from God to build an altar for all these offerings. When the priest, Pinchas, and the chieftains of the community who were with him heard this, they approved. And the priest says to them, now we know that God is in our midst, since you have not committed such treachery, you have actually saved Israelites from punishment by God. And they return and they give a report, and the Israelites were pleased and they praised God, and they spoke no more of going to war to ravage the land where they dwelled. And the Reubenites and the Gadites named the altar witness, meaning it is a witness between us and them that the Eternal is our God. We are almost at the end. We actually have just one last chapter, which will be the farewell address of Joshua to the people, and we'll see that he dies at the end, and that will bring us to the end of the portions that we're looking at in the book of Joshua. We will not do that, though, until after Passover. Next week, as I said at the beginning, next week, we're going to honor Passover by looking at the Song of Songs, short book. It's read during Passover. And if we have time, we'll look at another song, which was the song that the Israelites sang at the sea when they were delivered, which is actually the reading for the seventh day of Passover. The Song of Songs is read on Shabbat. So I've got like 3 more minutes. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Francesca.
I have a question. Well, a couple things. So I've never heard of a half tribe. So which half? Please explain that.
That's a great question. We don't know. We know that, so each tribe, right, is made up of clans and families and so on.
Yes.
So 2 tribes and then a bunch of people who have an organization, right? They have chieftains and so on. They come, but we're never told here, right? We don't know who's in, who's out. When the land gets allocated, we didn't read it, but there is some sense of it, but it's not so clear. There was another
question. Yes, one other. So I'm wondering, was this sort of like the idea about having this extra altar? Would this be more like how we have synagogues all over the place? If one's too far away, you can go to another one?
I don't think so, at least the way they present it. They're presenting it that they never meant it as an altar. It's just a replica, and it's just there to show that they're part of the people.
Oh, okay.
But it's clear that there was a Jewish community later on, much later on, in Elephantine in Egypt, that did have their own altar, that in fact had their own. So we're not talking about biblical times now, we're talking about later. But this idea, Deuteronomy has said there's only one, nothing else. But it doesn't seem, but all of this is different from synagogues, right?
Oh, okay.
Synagogue, remember that the word for synagogue is Beit Knesset.
Yes.
The house of assembly. It's where Jews come together. And we pray there, we read Torah there, but it's not the same as the ritual that was performed on behalf of the whole people in the temple. It's completely different.
So it's just there is a monument, not
they're saying, hey, this isn't an altar, it's just a monument. Now, one could say, right, when they realized that, you know, all the other tribes, right, are going to come and make war on them, they told a different story. It might be that they wanted their own local altar. But they say no, they say that's not what it is. You know, you can look at it cynically or you could take them at their word. Okay, I thought I saw one other question. Yeah, Saul and then Barry.
Yeah, I wanted to mention in Akev, after V'hayayim Shemo Tishma'u, you have something very similar to what you just read in Yehoshua. La'ahava et Adonai Elohechem l'lechet b'chol derachav u'ledav kavo.
Right. So it's almost the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, scholars, modern scholars, who want to identify different strands of the Jewish tradition that have been brought together, right? Rather than seeing the Torah as a unity, they talk about Deuteronomist, right? Who's responsible for Deuteronomy. And they say this is obviously from the same school because the language is so similar. There was one more. Yeah, Barry, last one. Muted again.
What is the significance of the altar being in Shiloh, you know, versus the centrality of Jerusalem?
Yeah. Well, remember, Jerusalem is, the tribes are not going to conquer Jerusalem, actually. Despite the fact it says Jerusalem was conquered, not true, didn't happen. It's not till the time of David that Jerusalem is conquered, and eventually the altar, the ark, is brought from Shiloh to Jerusalem. At this point in time, to the extent that things are centralized, they're centralized at Shiloh. Jerusalem is later. Okay, so I'm going to run. I actually have an appointment at 12:30, so I'm going to go. I will see you all next week. Song of Songs, maybe the Song at the Sea, and then we will finish the book of Joshua the week after Pesach, and maybe get in a little bit to Judges as well. So see you next week.
Thank you. Good week.
Shavua tov.